Around the year 1440, a German inventor by the name of Johannes Gutenberg developed the printing press. And in doing so, he created an era of mass communication, one that would drastically change the world, especially for those who are Christians. Because Gutenberg's crowning work of his life was a 42-line Bible, also known as the Gutenberg Bible. And what he did was he made the Bible accessible to many people. Now, most of us here would agree that that's a pretty awesome thing. But let's fast forward about 500 years to another mass communication revolution known as the World Wide Web, or the Internet. And along with that, things like Google and Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and the list goes on. And then we'd probably shrug and go, I don't know if that one there is so great. But as I was preparing this week, I come across a quote, and I wanted to share with you as we consider tonight technology, good and bad. It says these growing social platforms are mission critical means to communicate the gospel. Why mission critical? To start, millennials, those who were born between 1981 and 1996, have grown up in a world where the internet and technology have played a major role in their lives and continue to do so. They account for approximately 75.4 million individuals, according to a 2015 survey. Add to that group the post-millennials, or Gen Z, those who were born between 1996 and 2010. According to Forbes, 2015, Gen Z makes up approximately 25% of the U.S. population, effectively making them larger than the millennials. Gen Zers have never known a world without the internet or social channels. In many ways, technology isn't just a part of their world, it is their world. It's how they communicate with each other and how they consume information. And if we're going to reach these generations and future generations, learning to use these platforms effectively is important. And so with that, I want to discuss tonight technology. Is it good or is it bad? I think most of us tonight would agree that we live in a media-saturated society, a highly technical and digital age. And I think it's critical that we're balanced in our evaluation of media and technology. See, technology to me is very much like the tongue, right? It's something that can build people up, but it's also something that can tear people down. If you're like me and you get the number of Amazon boxes we get at our house every week, a tool as simple as a pocket knife is very handy. And as effective as it is at opening many boxes, it can also be used to take a life. A tool such as an axe can cut down one of the largest trees, yet it can also be used as a weapon. Technology is very similar to these tools because I believe that it is the use of the technology that determines the moral effect. So, we can do two things. One, we can refuse to use technology, refuse to learn it, or we can learn to utilize technology to glorify God. So I want to look at a couple points tonight. One, I want us to think about consumption. And the other one, I want us to think about the content that we're consuming. You know, technology can be used for awesome reasons. One, tonight we have a light crowd. But because of technology, we're able to stream this on YouTube. We also use websites. This picture here was taken from the congregation we came from. And one of the neat things about the church's website, we can do a lesson. By the time the preacher gets done, you get to your car, that lesson's already uploaded on the website before you can even get out there for anyone in the world to see. Right? We're able to push the message out to people all over the world. Another great use of technology are something as simple as podcasts. And I don't know if you any of you listen to podcasts, but if you do, I highly recommend this one. Stop Being a Pew Potato with Josh Hudson, a good friend of ours that attended with us in Murfreesboro at Cason Lane. Well, what Josh Hudson does is he reminds us that it's not enough to simply sit in the pew. Right? It's not enough to just exist and be here and say, I'm a Christian and I'm good. Right? He encourages us, he challenges us, and his podcasts are filled with Scripture. So Stop Being a Pew Potato with Josh Hudson is an excellent example of how technology and media are used to glorify God. So as we consider consumption, we need to remember that God made our minds, right? And he wants them to be used for good. If we look at Matthew in 15 and 17, it says, "Do you not yet understand that whatever enters the mouth goes into the stomach and is eliminated? But those things which proceed out of the mouth come from the heart, and they defile a man. For out of the heart proceeds evil thoughts, murderers, adulterers, fornication, thieves, false witness, blasphemies. These are the things which defile a man." Brothers and sisters, let me tell you, I do not believe that your cell phone, that your computer, that your video games, that your social media platforms, they do not defile a man. Right? It is the things that we choose to watch, the things that we choose to play, the things that we choose to listen to. Those things defile the man. Proverbs 4:23, it says, "Above all else, guard your heart, for it is the wellspring of life." A friend of mine was telling me that when he was a kid, they used to drink out of a well. He said, one of the things you always wanted to do, you wanted to make sure that that well was clean. And what you were really doing is you were making sure that there weren't dead animals in there poisoning the well. So he said you were always looking for what you were consuming to ensure that what you were consuming was not poison. So the question is, am I concerned with what I'm consuming? Do you think about the things that you eat? Do you think about the things that you drink? Are you nearly as concerned about the media that you consume as you are with the food and the drink that you consume? Because we are the temple of God. If we look at 2 Corinthians in chapter 6, starting in verse 16, it says, "For we are the temple of the living God, as God has said, I will live with them and walk with them, and I will be their God, and they will be my people. Therefore, come out from them and be separate, says the Lord. Touch no unclean thing, and I will receive you." We are God's special temple, and we should be concerned about what we bring into this temple and what goes into that temple. But we also need to have nothing to do with the fruitless deeds of darkness, but rather expose them. Be very careful then be very careful then how you live, not as unwise, but as wise, making the most of every opportunity, because the days are evil. You know, there have been people who have said to me, you know, Andrew, it's just not the same, right? The things that we face today with social media, they didn't face them before, right? We have new challenges today. Well, it reminds me of the book of Ecclesiastes, 1 in verse 9, right? Where it says that there is nothing new under the sun. Technological communications are not a new phenomenon. Just like the printing press, we can also look at the telegraph. Samuel Morse created the telegraph around 1840. It says in 1840, Samuel Morse, he sent the first telegraph message from Washington, D.C. to Baltimore. By 1866, a telegraph line had been laid across the Atlantic from the U.S. to Europe. And although the telegraph had fallen out of widespread use by the start of the 21st century to be replaced by the telephone, the fax machine, the internet, it, along with things like the printing press, laid the groundwork for communications revolutions that led to later innovations. If we look at the message that was sent on that day, on Friday, May 24th in 1844, Numbers 23:23, what hath God wrought? See, this technological breakthrough resulted in a simultaneous and instantaneous communication. New rules had to be created to regulate how these telegraph operators and operations were conducted. See, because just like Facebook today, the telegraph was used for flirting and many other things. There's an interesting book, Wired Love, a 1980s book, or excuse me, an 1890s book on how people fell in love via this new media, the telegraph. See, it's not new. The media that we use today, it'll be a new problem 100 years from now. Just like we use the excuse like they did before. There's nothing new under the sun. I want us to think of some interesting consumption statistics here. You know, back in 2011, there was a statistic that there were more TVs than there were people in households. And people just thought that was outrageous. Now, a new statistic, when we look at phones and tablets and computers and everything else, the average household has more than 11 connected devices. And it is believed that over 26,000 hours of screen time will be used by a child by the time that they are 18. So we need to be concerned with what's being consumed in our homes. So what are your kids being exposed to? What are you being exposed to? Violence, risk-taking behaviors, videos of stunts or challenges that may inspire unsafe behavior, sexual content, negative stereotypes, substance abuse. They're exposed to cyber bullies and predators. Advertising aimed directly at children, misleading, inaccurate information. Something that's interesting, and I won't stay on this long, but if you're interested in it, let me know. I'll give you a couple names. There's one, someone gave me this guy's name a couple years ago, and he's got some really great articles, but the guy's name is, he's a doctor. His name is Dr. Dimitri Christakis. And he's a pediatrician, and he's done several TED Talks, and he's done a couple interviews, but he really looks at why screen time is bad for babies, right? And the effects that consumption has on us. Dr. Jeff Myers, he discussed the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, that is the executive center of the brain, and he talked about how video games stimulate the pleasure center of the brain, right? That is, they gives people a sense of accomplishment, even though you yourself have not actually accomplished anything. And he said the effects of it are similar to that of crack cocaine. He also goes on to relate the passiveness of young men because they have arranged the culture of their brain into thinking that they have done something when in fact they've accomplished nothing. Another one, Dr. Walsh, he was quoted as saying, neurons that fire together wire together. And if we're to translate that, what he's really saying is whatever the brain does a lot, the brain gets really good at. So for example, video games. If you play violent video games, what are you conditioning your brain to become good at? He also goes on and talks about the detriment to learning, talks about the resulting the resulting loss of speed, efficiency, and accuracy in regard to multitasking. But again, there's a lot of those. Let me know if you like some of those names, because there's some really neat articles, I think, especially for fathers of young children, it's something to consider. So aside from consumption, I think it's also important that we think about the content that we're absorbing. But before we do that, we need to take a look at a couple, if you will, basic Bible truths before we look at how we deal directly with social media. One, we need to be careful. Careful little eyes what you see. In Matthew 6:22, the lamp of the body is the eye. If therefore your eye is good, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is bad, then the whole body will be full of darkness. If therefore the light that is in you is darkness, how great is that darkness? See, if you don't believe what the experts have said, if people that have spent their entire careers trying to understand the effects of violence in video games or movies or things of that nature, if you don't believe what they say, how about Matthew 6:22 and 23? Because the way I kind of summed this up was what we look at and what we allow ourselves to occupy our time, ultimately that's what influences us. Look at what Job said in 31:1. He said, I have made a covenant with my eyes. Right? In Philippians, we read that earlier, and what it's really looking at here is the kind of light that fills our room, that fills our body, that fills our character, is what we let in through the eyes. So we need to be careful what we see. Oh, be careful, little ears, what you hear. And sticking with the theme of Philippians 4:8, really the direction here is purity of mind. To dwell with those things that we need to be careful not to do, we need to make sure that we do not allow other things that would take away from that. That includes the things that we hear. I think most of us would probably agree that words are the most powerful thing that we have. Be it written or spoken. So we also need to be careful, little mouths, what we say. In James 3:8, it says, but no man can tame the tongue, for it is an unruly evil, full of deadly poison. With it we bless God and Father, and with it we curse men, who have been made in the similitude of God. Out of the same mouth proceed blessings and cursings. My brethren, these things ought not be so. See, this is perhaps the hardest and probably the most personal of all of these principles. This is not about, what I can post or how much I engage in social media, but it's really looking at, in our society, even though I have the right to post something, probably doesn't necessarily mean I should. In Colossians 4:6, let your speech always be with grace, seasoned with salt, that you may know how you ought to answer each one. We ought to consider two things with this. One, if you would not say it in person, should you really be typing it out online? And the second is, if it doesn't build someone up, if it doesn't edify, do I really need to be saying it anyway? I want to look at the goals of media. All right, I can tell you my opinion. My opinion doesn't really mean much of anything, so we'll look at what experts consider to be the goal of media. Robert Pittman, right? He's the founder of MTV himself, was quoted as saying, we don't just shoot for 14-year-olds, we own them. See, media is not neutral, all right? The objective is to entertain and then control. Another gentleman named Phil, he was quoted as saying, God does not think that it's cool if we entertain ourselves with violence, murder, and mayhem, and when people disagreed with him, he would quickly go to Proverbs 6:16-18. There are 6 things that the Lord hates, 7 that are detestable to him. Haughty eyes, a lying tongue, hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that devises wicked schemes, feet that are quick to rush into evil. Tim Winter. He is the president of the Parents Television Council. He's got 20 plus years experience in broadcasting, cable, internet, news media, and he summed up media by saying media is toxic. Phil Chambers spent 35 years of his life in research on the effect of violent media. Spent time as a homicide researcher. He taught counter-homicide. He interviewed over 200 killers. And what he ended up coming up with was there are two different groups of people who deny the impact of video violence. Those who are addicted to it and those who sell it. Yet for some reason we still have people who say, well, you know what? It doesn't affect me. Well, how do you know? It's kind of the idea of drinking a beer. How many beers does it take for you to get drunk? Well, you don't know until you start drinking them. Why doesn't it affect you is probably a better question. Have you become numb to the vulgarity and the violence? I think about a story I've shared before. When I was deployed to Afghanistan in 2014, I watched a couple movies while I was there. American Sniper and Lone Survivor. I remember going and talking to my buddies and telling them, guys, these movies are accurate. When it comes to the special operations community, what they have really done, like they are good movies in terms of, you know, how accurate they are. And I'm going on about just praising these movies. Man, they are great movies. They're great movies. And a couple of days later, a friend of mine, Seth McDonald, he posts something online, and he goes on to talk about these movies. And he said, I don't know how any Christian would go see these. Because one movie had the F word over 60 times, and the other had it over 140 times. And I'm the type of person, I have to prove you wrong. And so I went back, and I pulled the movie up, and I started within 13 seconds, I heard it. And I didn't make another 5 minutes throughout the movie. And see, really what happened there was I was in this environment of special operations. I'm around people that were using filthy language. And even though I myself didn't use the language, I've become numb to hearing it. So when we say it doesn't affect us, we need to ask ourselves, does it? And if it doesn't, why doesn't it affect us? You know, luckily for us, we should all know what's in these movies before we go see them. There's no reason for us to ever watch a movie and not understand in advance the content of the movie. With great tools like Kids in Mind, Screen It, Plugged In, Common Sense Media, and there are many others out there. But I encourage you to do your own research when you question a movie or before you watch it, especially in front of your kids. The other one I hear is, what I do, it doesn't affect others. And this is an interesting one to me. And one I've heard specifically was, you know, my social media browsing, that doesn't affect anyone else. That only affects me. I think I've shared this story here before, but I had a friend of mine who come up and he said, Andrew, man, I can't believe this. You know, my wife and I caught our kid watching something on my Facebook account, and it was not appropriate, and I cannot believe he saw that on there, and I just don't understand why it was there. You know, when we think about ads, right, and this is a great one because I think anyone would relate to this. If you go out and you know, if Kate and I were talking about mulch, we want to go mulch the garden, and we have this conversation, you have any bit of technology, I think we've all experienced, hey, we need to go mulch the garden. Next thing you know, you get online and there's mulch advertisements, right? And it freaks all of us out, right? Companies don't spend hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars a year in research to get it wrong. See, when you're browsing stuff on your phone or on your account, right? Your Google account if you're logged in on your computer and you're logged into your Google account, you're browsing on your computer, and you're also logged into that account on your phone, or maybe your kid's phone, right? That data is being shared, right? So to think that it doesn't affect anyone else, it just doesn't make sense. You know, the other one I want to throw out there, though, because something I've noticed, you know, I probably should say one of the things I do for a living. So I work in cybersecurity. And part of that job is digital forensics, right? And one of the things I enjoy is when a computer stops working, it's not just enough to understand why the computer stopped working, right? What I really want to understand is, you know, what did you access that broke the computer, right? A computer would die. We all understand that. But really, malware, for instance. Well, how did that malware get there? And so that's one of the things we tend to dig down. We want to find out, well, how did it actually get there? And a lot of times what I have found out when people have given me their computers, malware comes from a couple places, two big places, right? One, social media platforms, and the other one, adult content. And almost always, when people bring me their computers, adult content's number one, right? And I wish that this is friends of mine out here in the world, but I'm talking about brethren who've attended in the past. So I want to throw some of these tools up there. Accountability tools, right? If you struggle with what you do online, tools like Covenant Eyes, NetNanny, Zift. Screen Time is a great one because it's free on your iPhone, right? You can go in there and plug it in and say, you know, you can't watch certain types of content, things like that. If you have any questions about any of these, let me know. Always interested in talking about geek stuff like this. You know, when we say that it doesn't affect me, it's interesting because advertisers sure think that it does. If they wouldn't spend so much money targeting us. If you look at the last Super Bowl, $5.6 million were spent on 30-second ads. And their return on investment, nearly $14 billion for that 30 seconds. They don't get it wrong. You look at video expenditures. Halo 3 grossed $170 million their first 24 hours. Grand Theft Auto 5 grossed $815 million in its first 24 hours. Call of Duty Black Ops grossed $500 million in its first 24 hours. And if we think that they don't understand what they're doing in targeting people, we're fooling ourselves. So should we be concerned with what we're looking at? I've had people ask me, Andrew, are you trying to tell me you don't think that we as Christians should watch movies or TVs or shouldn't listen to music, shouldn't play video games? That's not what I'm saying. What I am saying, though, is I do believe that there's a battle that's being fought, right? A battle for our hearts and for our minds. And that battleground where good and evil is fought is the human mind. Right? That's why we're told in 1 Peter, gird your minds for action. I think about, if you recall, in 2004 in northern Iraq, there was a suicide bomber, an insurgent, who got onto a base. He went into a cafeteria. He detonated a bomb. He killed around 23 people, 13 U.S. soldiers. And people were surprised at this because this is someone that worked with them. Right? When I was in Afghanistan in 2012 and 2014, we had the local Afghans. They would come in, they would work on the base with us, they would fix our air conditioners, they would fix our vehicles, they worked alongside of us. And they would tell you their stories. They would tell you about their families, right? And they really started getting close to people. Right? But what we learned that they were really doing was, not all of them, but some of them, this was the enemy's way of working their way into our society, right? Ingraining themselves, woven themselves into our culture. And this is similar to what media has done. So when we consider the games that we play, the movies and the TV shows that we watch, the music we listen to, the books that we read, I'm not saying we don't enjoy those things. I'm saying we keep something like Deuteronomy chapter 6 in mind. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all of your soul, and with all of your strength. These commandments that I give to you today are to be upon your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk to them when you sit at home, and when you walk along the road, and when you lie down, and when you get up. Tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Write them on the door frames of your house and on your gates. So I'm not saying that we don't enjoy these things. I'm not saying that we don't watch movies. I'm saying consider, are the things that you're doing, would you impress them upon your children? That's really what I would ask. You can ask yourselves questions. Would I watch this with Jesus? Does it improve my knowledge or my moral strength? Does it result in some kind of peace or tranquility in my mind or in my home? And ultimately, what we need to do is we need to resolve to be more like Jesus. Create in me a pure heart, O God, and renew a steadfast spirit within me. We go back to the key theme for tonight. Right, Philippians 4 and 8. Finally, brethren, whatever things are true, whatever things are noble, whatever things are just, whatever things are pure, whatever things are lovely, whatever things are of a good report, if there's any virtue and if there's anything praiseworthy, meditate on these things. See, we can think better. We can watch better. We can read better. We can do better. But we need to take control. And we need to ensure that we're not enslaved to technology and social media, and that we are utilizing them in a way that's glorifying God. Second Corinthians 10:5, taking every thought captive to the obedience of Christ. You know, when I say we need to take control, I'm a firm believer in what I like to call top-down leadership. Right? Something we learned in the military. One of the best leaders I ever worked with, he would never ask you to do something he wasn't willing to do himself. He wants you to go rake grass, he's going to go rake grass. He wants you to go rake lines in the sand, he'll go rake lines in the sand. Right? You knew this guy would never ask you to do something he wasn't willing to do himself. Top-down leadership. He would never put you in a position that he wasn't willing to be in himself. But what top-down leadership means to me is it starts with us, fathers, the men of the home. Right? We need to be in control of what's happening in our homes. What's being watched, what's being viewed, what devices are connecting to our service at home. The great thing is there are also many positive effects to technology. Think about, we talked about this earlier, right? Think about the church's website. We can push the gospel to people all over the world if we want to, right? Or at least put it out there so that people can stream it. Right? I remember the times when I was in Afghanistan, the only thing that I had as an option to worship at times was viewing live services. Podcast. Being able to do Skype or Zoom or Facebook or, FaceTime studies, things of that nature. These are all positive ways that we can use technology. If you think about the YouVersion Bible app on your phone, it's been downloaded over 470 million times. You can actually put it on your iWatch. I don't know how you're going to read it, but you can put it there. And I'm not old and I can't see it. There was a survey done by the American Bible Society, and it said that 60% of people within the U.S. said that they wish they would read their Bible every day. The Bible app makes that possible. Anywhere. At any time. Right? Hundreds of Bible plans, over thousands of Bible versions. You can even listen to the Bible. If you're lazy like I am, and you just want to get in the car and drive down the road, you can have someone read it to you and still meditate on it. And you don't even have to do the work. Past generations could have never imagined the incredible opportunities that we have to engage in God's words anytime and anywhere. That's what we have afforded to us. And I'll leave you with one last verse. From everyone who has been given much, much will be demanded. And from the one who is entrusted with much, much will be asked. So I ask you tonight, are you captivated by media? Are you enslaved to technology? You know, this may not be an area that you struggle with. But I ask you to be patient with those who may. Because we're all really trying to work on becoming a better version of ourselves as we work to become more like Jesus. But to be like Jesus, you need to accept him first. Have you done that? If not, why not? You know, perhaps media is something, technology is something that's enslaving you and you have sinned. That's something you can take care of as well. Whether it be private, public, doesn't matter. But if there's anything that we can do for you, we hope that you would let that be known as we stand and sing.